All right, we are now live. We can start admitting participants.
All right, good luck, everybody.
Welcome to the revised Lead and Copper Rule public listening session. My name is Kira Smith and I will be facilitating today's session. If you haven't already, we invite you to view the EPA Administrator's video message on the importance of these engagements to the agency. It can be found at www.epa.gov/safewater. We also encourage you to watch the Lead and Copper Rule 101 video, which can also be found at www.epa.gov/safewater. This session is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Before we begin, I would like to introduce representatives from EPA who are here today to listen to your comments. For this session, we have Jennifer McLean, Yuting Galeran, and Eric Bernison. If you'd like to make some remarks, listeners, please do.
Yes. Thank you, Kira. And thank you to everyone for joining us for this listening session this afternoon. I'm Jennifer McLean, and I'm the Director of the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water at the Environmental Protection Agency. Protecting people from lead is a top priority for EPA, and we are holding this listening session today to hear your input. We thank you so much for sharing your time with us and giving us the comments that you want us to understand the experience that you've had with lead in drinking water and your comments on the lead and copper rule revisions. We appreciate your input and are looking forward to hearing you today. Thank you. Eric?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Kira, for facilitating today. I want to add my thanks. My name is Eric Bernison, and I am the Director of the Standards and Risk Management Division within the Office of Groundwater Drinking Water, and it's my division that is leading this review of the lead and copper rule revisions, and we very much appreciate your input today. I thank you for taking the time to give us your thoughts about lead and copper rule revisions so that we can consider them as we review this important regulatory requirement. Yuting?
Good afternoon, I'm Yuting Galeran. I'm the Deputy Office Director in the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water. It's good to see everyone this afternoon, and we look forward to hearing your input, and thank you for taking the time to participate today.
Thank you, Jennifer, Yuting, and Eric. I'm going to go over a few ground rules now. Each participant is allotted 3 minutes to make their comments. Your adherence to this time allocation will allow all participants an equal opportunity to provide their comments. When it is your scheduled time, I will call your name and invite you to unmute your microphone so you may begin your statement. At that time, please make sure to unmute your microphone on Zoom, as well as the computer or phone you're joining from. If I cannot hear you, I will let you know. If possible, please consider turning on your camera if you're comfortable doing so. When you have 1 minute left, I will turn on my camera and you should begin to wrap up your statement. I will give you a verbal warning at 30 seconds and will hold up a red card when your 3 minutes are up. At this time, we will mute your microphone. If you're joining by telephone, I will give you a verbal warnings at 30 seconds and when your 3 minutes are up. Again, to ensure that everyone signed up for the session is able to speak, we ask that you keep within the time limit and keep your comments focused on lead in drinking water and the revised lead and copper rule. We thank you for your interest and look forward to hearing your input. So it looks like our first speaker may be ready. Our first speaker is Aaron Salinas from Texas. Aaron, your microphone should be on. Please begin your statement.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the lead and copper rule. My name is Aaron Salinas. I'm an advanced practice registered nurse from the Rio Grande Valley. So it is important that the EPA enforce strict rules and regulations for all water system operators and managers of community water system. The revisions of lead and copper rule that was finalized is inadequate to protect communities and reduce exposure to lead in drinking water. There are 6 million lead service lines that remain in the ground of the United States. The happening of Flint, Michigan, the water crisis in 2014 has raised many concerns in communities like mine from drinking water and sources that may have exposed them to lead. The Rio Grande Valley is at the Texas-Mexico border, an area that is recognized most impoverished area in the country, with 31% of the poverty rate. A place with the largest ethnic group being Hispanic or Latinos, the Rio Grande Valley faces many issues and challenges with infrastructure. It is home to 39% of the state's colonias. Colonias are predominantly Latino impoverished areas along the Texas-Mexico border that lack essential public services such as safe drinking water. The homes lack these essentials as a result of having old and outdated drainage systems in place. Many of these homes still have brass and bronze faucets and fixtures. One thing that is for certain, and we can all agree on, are the health hazards that exposure to lead can have on our health, such as our cardiovascular system, renal system, and our reproductive system. And in addition, the harmful effects that can happen to babies, children, and expectant mothers if exposed to even low levels of lead. Social determinants of health are the non-medical factors that influence health outcomes. To have the Environmental Protection Agency provide the first significant update in the lead and copper rule in nearly 30 years is clearly unacceptable. And the revised rule must be strengthened to protect our communities and our public. We are continuing to put people's lives on the line. It's important that the rule, that the lead and copper rule be overhauled, and we ensure that we are providing safe drinking water. This requires that we continue to invest in adequate monitoring, testing waters in all communities, and setting priorities in the most vulnerable communities first and equally. In addition, the rate in which lead service lines are replaced must be increased, and there should be a ban on all partial lead services replacement lines. There are many things we don't have choices in life, but it's important that we set our color, our income, and all other factors aside, and we do what is right. And that we are clear with our needs to be transparent and provide adequate measures to ensure our community is safe in regards to the water that we drink on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salinas. Our next speaker is, hang on a second, multiple mouses. Next up is Yana Lambrinidou from Washington, D.C. Yana, I believe you should be unmuted now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for holding this hearing and giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Yana Lambrinidou. I am a Washington, D.C. parent who lived through our city's historic lead and water crisis of 2001 to 2004, and I am co-founder of the Campaign for Lead-Free Water. I've been working on lead in water since 2004. In 2014 and 15, I served on EPA's NIDWAC Lead and Copper Rule Work Group and filed a dissenting report. I'd like to make 3 points. First, 30 years after the LCRR's enactment, it is now imperative to incorporate in the rule the science on the contribution of lead in water to elevated blood lead levels. Tap water is the only lead source that exists in almost every building and that people of all ages consume every day to stay alive. A large body of work by EPA's own scientist, Simone Triandafilidou, and colleagues shows that oft-repeated claims about lead in water being a secondary source of exposure are grossly simplistic, misleading, and in many cases, outright inaccurate. Depending on the circumstances and for entire groups of vulnerable populations, lead in water can be the primary and even sole source of exposure. A fact that is routinely missed by prevalent water sampling methods, blood lead screening programs, environmental risk assessments in children's homes, and several peer-reviewed studies that are rooted in erroneous assumptions and flawed sampling methods. My second point is related. The requirements that the LCRR imposes on water utilities must reflect scientifically established facts about how lead in water works, not an imaginary of how lead in water works. In the February 2020 comments that the Campaign for Lead-Free Water and a coalition of grassroots environmental justice groups submitted to EPA, we point out numerous areas in the rule that contradict uncontested realities about the nature and impact of lead in water. These areas include corrosion control treatment, tap sampling, and lead in water in schools. We rely on EPA to recognize that protecting people from lead in water will need extensive revisions of the current revisions. Lastly, since the LCR's compliance mechanism does not protect individual water users from chronic or acute exposures to lead in water, the LCRR must mandate routine public disclosure about the prevalence of lead-contaminated water, health risks associated with such water, including miscarriage and fetal death, and effective precautionary measures that can prevent exposures right away. A federally funded Filter First program that promotes point-of-use filtration and ensures that such filtration is accessible to all is crucial and urgent for preventing additional and ongoing harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lambrinidou. Our next speaker is Mike McGill from North Carolina. Mr. McGill, you should be unmuted now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Mike McGill and I'm president of Water PIO, a public communications firm dedicated to helping water utilities and departments affordably improve their customer media and crisis communications. I started my firm after working for more than a decade as a communications leader with the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, Loudoun Water, and the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority. I wish to speak to you today about my hope that you will review the revised LCR and consider reducing its many public communications challenges. Before I lay out those challenges, I want to join with others and say that we must get the lead out of our drinking water systems. We must protect future generations from exposure. Because of the importance to get the lead out, it is incumbent on all of us to make sure this effort is carried out correctly and puts water utilities and departments in a position to succeed. Unfortunately, the revised LCR puts water professionals in a position to fail. Because I've handled lead exceedances since 2007, I've been asked to speak at water conferences across the country about LCR communications. I always lead off with the need to proactively inform the press and the public about LCR testing and corrosion control programs before a problem is found. For credibility's sake, however, I must also address the elephant in the room, the fact that the vast majority of the professionals I'm speaking to don't have anybody specifically employed to communicate with the public about their services. It's why a recent AWWA poll found that only 28% of customers remembered a communication from their utility in the last year, even during COVID. Yes, for some, they want to be outside out of mind when it comes to public attention, but for thousands of utilities and departments, they just can't meet some of the revised LCR's new comms requirements. These water pros won't have a chance to succeed, and their unavoidable failures will create unwarranted public panics that could result in a nationwide lack of confidence in our drinking water. The drop in the system-wide public notification from 30 days to 24 hours is problematic at best. Because of the staffing issues I mentioned, utilities and departments will make mistakes during their worst possible moments. Reputations will be permanently damaged, including that of public water as a whole. There are a variety of other comms-related challenges under the revised LCR, including communicating the lead service line inventory process, clarifying the new trigger level versus the action level, handling difficult school and child care facility testing program conversations, and explaining lead service line replacement projects, all carry the potential for chaos. Because of these challenges, just as we're finally getting the lead out, we could very well be making the case that the public shouldn't trust their drinking water. That's why I believe the EPA needs to reopen the LCR and make comms-related adjustments. I thank you for your time and consideration. We've already seen tremendous work by the EPA in the last few months, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
We are running a little bit ahead of schedule. Our next speaker is Elin Betanzo from Michigan. Elin, are you ready? She's ready.
Yes.
You're unmuted now.
You hear me? Do you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Elin Warren-Betanzo. I started off my drinking water career with many of you at the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, and I worked there during the DC lead crisis, and later I uncovered the Flint water crisis. Those of you who know me are probably familiar with my technical comments. I hope you'll take the time to review my written technical comments on the LCRR proposal and the rule delay. But today I'm going to talk from the perspective of an impacted resident. I live in Beverly Hills, Michigan, and we had a lead action level exceedance in 2017. Lead in water is what I do for a living. I hunt down CCRs, I follow water departments on social media, I read all my village newsletters and emails, and I carefully read each quarterly water bill. Despite the lead and copper rule requirements and a brand new 3-day public advisory requirement in Michigan, I didn't hear about the lead action level exceedance in Beverly Hills until a reporter called me asking for a quote. As we talked on the phone, I found the public education materials buried on page 10 of a quarterly newsletter that had been sitting on my counter for a week. You don't expect to find urgent information about your water quality on page 10 of a newsletter that repeats the same information year after year. And I'll note that Beverly Hills met all of the public notice and education requirements of the lead and copper rule. If someone who does this work for a living and is actively looking for this information can't find timely notification, it means that the public outreach requirements have failed for everyone. There were no changes in the LCRR that would have changed my experience in Beverly Hills. We need a complete overhaul of the consumer information sections of the lead and copper rule. And you can look to the Michigan lead and copper rule for several improvements that specifically address what happened in Beverly Hills. Next, I want to talk about my experience with the lead service line replacement requirements. As you might guess by its name, Beverly Hills, Michigan has the 4th highest per capita income in the state of Michigan. Our city says we had 3 lead service lines back in 2017. Obviously, money is not a problem in this community, but now in 2021, we still have 3 lead service lines. The 7% replacement requirement in the lead and copper rule did nothing for us, and we still have the same small number of lead service lines as when we started in an incredibly wealthy community. The lead and copper rule revision still has no mandatory lead service line replacement requirement and reduces the pace of triggered replacement to 3% per year. The lead action level exceedance in Beverly Hills is proof that water systems will do the bare minimum, even those with none of the struggles of our low-income, disadvantaged Black and Brown communities. We need explicit and urgent requirements for lead service line replacement, and our low-income communities also need significant financial support to get it done. EPA must include a requirement in the lead and copper rule revisions to replace all lead service lines within 10 years. My experience in Beverly Hills demonstrates that the lead lines will only come out once EPA makes it mandatory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elin. Our next speaker is Valerie Morshis from California. Valerie, you may speak now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the EPA for conducting this listening session on the proposed LCRR. So I'm a public health advocate and was pleased when the CDC recently declared that racism is a public health crisis, is a public health threat, something that we all knew for some time. And the proposed LCRR is one mechanism that's going to codify and perpetuate systemic racism to the detriment of public health. Without a robust mechanism to ensure swift and complete remediation, the lead service lines inventory will only act as a new method of redlining. Studies have shown that communities of color, those with low incomes, rural areas, and children are disproportionately affected by lead in their drinking water. Those are the exact same people who are historically disenfranchised and lacking in the political power necessary at the local level to demand that their water systems address their needs. The consequences of the lead service line inventory and slow pace of remediation will be that the rich and powerful leap to the front of the line for service line replacements, and those in the back will have to wait. Wait while their children are poisoned, their property values decline, and investments in their communities plummet. Access to safe, affordable water is a human right, and the proposed LCRR does not go far enough to ensure that our most vulnerable are not left behind the lead line. Lead poisoning is not the only public health crisis that our vulnerable communities are facing. These communities are also disproportionately affected by malnutrition and obesity. Sugar-sweetened beverages are a major unnecessary source of additional calories in children's diets, and it's hard to tell students to drink less soda if there is no safe alternative available. The elementary school in my neighborhood has drinking fountains testing at 13.9 parts per billion for lead, well exceeding the new trigger level of 10 parts per billion. Drink less soda, drink more neurotoxin is not a winning message to change behavior. As the Sioux say, water is life, and the EPA should follow Executive Order 13990 to ensure equity in our lives. The proposed LCRR creates a new way to stigmatize communities in which people of color, the poor, and children live, work, and play. Stronger guidelines and funding must be provided for remediation and mitigation to ensure racial, economic, and environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. At this time, we are going to take a 10-minute break to allow more speakers time to join the session. Please join us again at 3:32 p.m. Again, if there's questions and technical support, we've got our slide up for that, where to find the live stream, and again, where to submit a written comment to the docket. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Let's see, are my speakers, or not my speakers, are my listeners on? There's Eric and Jennifer. Welcome. Just give Yuting a minute. There's Yuting. Welcome back. All right, our next speaker is Cheryl Nen from Wisconsin. Cheryl, if you would like to go ahead and start providing your comment, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Cheryl Nen, and I am with Milwaukee Riverkeeper, also a City of Milwaukee resident, and I have a lead pipe at my home. Thank you for the opportunity to make comments today. So we think EPA should really make full lead service line replacement a requirement as part of a compliance plan by Community Water Services. We believe that, exposure to lead, even at low levels, can cause serious health effects in adults and children. In Milwaukee, we have about 70,000 lead pipes that need to be replaced. And I think the city's goal is about 1,000 per year. And last year, I think they did about a third of that, partially because of the pandemic. But, generally it'll take about 70 years for us to replace our pipes here at current rates. And we feel like that's not fast enough. And so we do think that the past rulemaking in the last administration failed to really consider the impact of water systems fully replacing lead service lines as a valid option or alternative. And we don't think that they adequately looked at reducing the lead action level, both of which we think are necessary to protect our communities. I think, requiring the lead service line replacement was recommended by the National Drinking Water Advisory Council. And they recommended that, removing those from contact with drinking water to the greatest extent possible and minimizing risk of exposure in the meantime was important. And I think we'd agree with that. We also think that the analysis that was done under the last administration, by failing to not really look at full replacement, that they really didn't conform with statutory requirements or best practices for regulatory analysis. So, and we also feel that EPA didn't fully explain why you're not changing the lead action level below the existing 15 micrograms per liter. We don't feel that this level is currently protective of the public. I don't think it ever was. And our understanding is that it was based on a 1991 feasibility determination, which also wasn't revised. So we do appreciate that there was a new trigger level that was added, is kind of an early precaution to a full action level of 10 micrograms per liter. But we also kind of question whether that's a reasonable level. It doesn't seem like there was a lot of exploration or analysis provided about, what would be the right level that would be most protective of public health. And I guess in conclusion, it's our understanding the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators called for also that full lead service line replacement. And they stated that that they felt that mandatory and consistent lead service line replacement, is basically necessary to provide the required incentive to address this problem. And we agree. So we would just urge you to reconsider that as an alternative as part of the rulemaking question. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for your hard work and for your consideration of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Next, we have Paul Schwartz from Washington, D.C. Paul, you should be unmuted now. Please begin your statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Schwartz, and I'm also a co-founder of the Campaign for Lead-Free Water, which is a network of individuals and organizations working locally and at the state level and nationally to protect communities from the often underestimated and routinely downplayed problem of lead in drinking water. Today, I'll focus on lead service line replacement requirements and the lead and copper rule revisions. Our coalition demands that the LCRR mandate a proactive, systemic, and full lead service line replacement program that is funded fully by water systems is implemented at a rate of at least 10% per year, irrespective of a water system's MCL status, their 90th percentile status, the lead trigger level status, or lead action level status, and completed in no more than 10 years. Additionally, ban partial lead service line replacement while crediting water utilities for replacing all lead-bearing plumbing materials along the entire length of a service line, e.g. lead pipe, galvanized pipe, lead-bearing meters, compression fittings, goosenecks, pigtails, and connectors. The proposed lead service line replacement requirement does not mandate proactive full lead service line replacement, while it continues to allow for partial pipe replacement of lead service lines. Despite mounting scientific evidence that lead service lines constitute a primary source of lead and water contamination, and that under certain circumstances, partial lead service line replacement can result in short and long-term lead and water spikes, EPA proposed revisions include a proactive full lead service line replacement program triggered by a lead trigger exceedance that does not enforce full lead service line replacement, include a reactive full lead service line replacement program triggered by a lead action level exceedance that reduces the annual rate of required lead service line replacement from 7 to 3%, and continue to allow for partial lead service line replacement. In Washington, D.C., where I live, for most of the past 20 years, partial pipe, not full lead service line replacement has been the norm, not the exception. If federal funding fails to materialize, current plans for full lead service line replacement, according to testimony given by DC Water at this past Monday's DC City Council Transportation and Environment Committee, could take until almost 2070 to complete. If the LCRR does not mandate full lead service line replacement with no allowance for partials, we will continue to see a slow walk or no action at all on systemic lead service line replacement, because nothing in the law will compel water utilities across the nation to take on this public health emergency. And in conclusion, if the partial line replacement is not banned outright in the LCRR, we will see the worsening of the lead exposure from accelerated partial pipe replacement programs masquerading as proactive lead service line replacement. Environmental justice and the principle of equal protection under the law compel EPA to issue a new rule that requires a systemic, not piecemeal approach to fully removing lead service lines in this generation and not kicking the can down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Our next speaker is Andy Bressler from Washington, D.C. Andy, you should be unmuted now. Please begin your statement. Oh, you're still muted, Andy.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Go ahead.
First, I did want to associate myself with the comments from Jana and from Elin and from Paul Schwartz. Absolutely agree with everything that they said. But my name is Andy Bressler. I'm a Washington, D.C. resident and father of twin boys who were exposed to excessive lead levels in our water. Thanks for taking the time to hear from the community and from people and families who have been impacted by lead exposure in water, and the seemingly glacial pace of action by the EPA over the last several decades on this very important problem. We have twin sons who were exposed to excessive lead levels in our water supply back in 2003 and 2004 here in DC. As you all know, DC had a significant lead water problem in those years. Exposure to excessive lead in our water is something that no parent wants to experience. We received notice that our children had high lead levels throughout 2003 and into early 2004, and could not understand what was causing these elevated lead levels. We had home inspections, but could not find the source until early in 2004, the Washington Post exposed the ongoing problem with lead levels in our water, much to our surprise. We were obviously surprised that time to learn that this lead exposure was coming from our drinking water, as public health and inspectors insisted that there were no lead water problems in DC. What we also learned later was the lead and water issue had been ongoing for decades in DC and was essentially a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, and that lead service lines and pipes would need to be replaced, but no action had been taken for decades. And just like to reiterate that certainly my view that full lead service line replacement needs to be a national priority, because this is something that we continue to see in community after community. Having lived through this crisis, it was very stressful, obviously trying to understand how the elevated lead levels would be impacting the development of our then 2- and 3-year-old sons. And I must say that at that time, EPA and DC public health staff that we had dealt with at the time were not very helpful overall. I think it's very important that public education needs to be a key component of the regulatory requirements to keep individuals in the community part of the process and try to keep them in the loop and not try to cover up the lead water issues that we found that many at EPA and other agencies were more focused on covering this up than trying to expose the issue and solve the problems. This should be a national priority as so many communities are impacted by these decaying lead pipes across the country. EPA and other agencies who are supposed to safeguard our water and our children's health often, again, are more focused on avoiding and covering up lead water and problems rather than trying to fix them. Again, thank you for your time. I appreciate the ability to comment on this very important issue.
Thank you very much, Andy. Next up, we have Naira Sharif from Michigan. Naira, your microphone is on. Please begin your statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Naira Sharif, and I'm the director of Flint Rising, a grassroots advocacy organization that formed in the aftermath of the Flint water crisis. I was one of many Flint residents who fought for acknowledgement that there was something wrong with our drinking water. I was also part of the team that designed the outreach strategy for the study that validated residents' belief that there was something wrong with their drinking water in 2015. Through our mobilization and advocacy efforts, we passed policies that shortened the notification window for customers if there was a Safe Drinking Water Act violation. We were also successful in changing Michigan's lead and copper rule, which is now one of the most robust in the nation. April 25th marked the 7th year anniversary since the beginning of the Flint water crisis. Over that course of time, we've learned some important lessons that I would like to share. There is a difference between compliance and safety. When residents hear that their water is safe to drink, they equate safety to medical oversight. Complying to drinking water standards is only adhering to current guidelines. Several medical associations are on the record that there is no safe level for lead. Even though in Michigan we lowered the lead action level from 15 parts per billion to 12 parts per billion, this is not enough. Water is life. The revised rule that will lower the action level from the revised federal rule that will lower the action level from 15 micrograms per liter to 10 micrograms per liter is like dying today and dying next month. The action level should be at the detect level, and partial service line replacement should be banned. We need to have health-based standards for lead. If we look at this using a public health lens, we need to get the lead out everywhere. There has to be a federal policy that lead service lines are to be replaced at no cost to the water customer. Furthermore, there needs to be grants to fund this. Under the current paradigm, loan or bond repayments will eventually be passed down to customers through rate hikes or fee hikes, and it could create undue hardship to those with fixed incomes. Lead in drinking water is not just a compliance issue, it is a public health issue and it needs to be treated as such. Finally, any response for LCR violations need to have respect and dignity for those directly impacted. Guidance should be grounded in equity. Communications in Flint initially were only in English. Initial filters given out weren't certified to remove lead. Under the initial response in Flint, people needed to show a state photo ID to receive water. In Michigan, you have to be a US citizen or permanent resident to have a state license or a photo ID. We also had ICE raids and warrant sweeps for people trying to get water. Also in Michigan, the name of your state ID has to match your birth certificate. For trans folks who can't afford gender affirming surgery, a driver's license can be a source of pain. We didn't have to have an ID to be poisoned. So why should IDs be required for any recovery interventions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm struggling with my unmute there for a second. Thank you so much, Naira. Good comments. Next up is Leona Wishart from North Carolina. Leona. You should be unmuted. Please begin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to start. Okay, yes, my name is Leona Whitchard, and I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and several environmental organizations which I support, including Environment NC, the Waterkeeper Alliance, the Sierra Club, Climate Reality, and others. To my knowledge, I personally have not been exposed to breathing or ingesting lead. I acknowledge that I'm a person of privilege and have grown old with good fortune and good health. Being so blessed, I feel compelled to become an advocate for people not as fortunate as I. The cause that I consider most basic is the preservation and protection of clean drinking water. The Clean Water Act may be one of the most impactful laws ever passed by the US Congress. It is imperative for the EPA to implement transformative changes as spelled out in the January 2021 lead and copper rules revision and get the lead out of our drinking water by removing and replacing all lead service lines. Less than a year ago, as the previous administration was leaving office, instead of preparing for an orderly transition of power, officials made a power grab. Unfortunately, this included the administrators at the EPA. Now, under the current administration, I applaud the January 2021 lead and copper rule revisions offered by the EPA. It makes sense that timelines may need to be adjusted to allow for the appropriate oversight by the current administration and to be sure that municipalities and other water service providers have time to understand and implement the revised rules. I trust that water service providers who may be handicapped technically or financially will have recourse to assistance as needed. There is no safe level of lead, but it is found in tap water in states across the nation. I'm giving a shout out to Krista Early, a clean water advocate for Environment NC. She spoke last year to the environmental issues team of the League of Women Voters chapter, to which I belong, on getting the lead out of drinking water in schools in North Carolina. She is the program manager of the Get the Lead Out campaign, which focuses on safe drinking water at schools and daycare centers. I learned that the faucets in older water fountains can contain lead, and this can be a source for lead the children get in drinking water. As it's been said before, every part of the water system, including the older faucets, spouts where you drink from, can be leaching water. So can be leaching lead from those pipes and poisoning our children. In recent years, the federal disinvestment in the Environmental Protection Agency has led to the absence of proper standards for monitoring toxins such as lead. And I will include PFAS, that's another topic for another day, but lead in public drinking supplies. Municipalities have opened the door to uncredentialed companies who are not trustworthy and profiteer instead of operating their water systems for the public good. This isn't how it should be. This isn't the water system people need and deserve. Managing water supplies is a public trust, and it means improving our public water systems and making water service safe and affordable for all. Lead pollution is plaguing many water systems in the US. It is time to invest in removing lead from the nation's aging water infrastructure and address environmental justice in the area of safe drinking water. We need the Environmental Protection Agency to establish and enforce national regulations and policies that ensure safe, lead-free drinking water for all. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Leona. Looks like our next speaker is ready, Becky Shirley from California. You should be unmuted. Please begin your statement.
Hi. My name is Becky Shirley, and I'm speaking today because now more than ever in my life, I'm so grateful that the country where I live wants to listen. I'm speaking for those who may not know that their government is listening. I am speaking for all the children who deserve the opportunity to drink healthy water and to grow up with all the potential with which they were born. I was a teacher in special education, and I know how hard it is to flourish in the traditional education system, where learning and behavior expectations already struggle to accommodate. Life-sustaining water must not create or aggravate a challenge. Healthy, life-sustaining water must be a priority and a right for every single child and for every single human. Safe, clean drinking water free of any dangerous metals is especially a social justice issue and is just one step in resolving inequities in this country. In my mind, this includes much of the Navajo Nation, where most families still need these lead and copper-free pipes to provide their homes with clean water. I know this isn't the topic, but it's got to be said somewhere. And if you're listening, I appreciate it. I ask that the EPA extend these rules to all people in this country. Water is life. And in the United States, clean, safe drinking water needs to be a right. Thank you so much for listening. So appreciated. I'm really happy to be an American citizen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. I wanted to just take a moment to pause. If you have registered to speak, but you joined under a different name or by phone, would you please raise your hand so we could identify you? You can either use the raise hand function or press Alt-Y on your keyboard. If you're on the phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. All right, I don't see any hands raised, but our next speaker is ready. Lori McFarland from Oregon. Please begin your statement.
Hi there.
Once you're unmuted. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, great.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. I can't see me yet, but I'll go ahead. Thank you for listening. I'm speaking on behalf of Portland Advocates for Lead-Free Water. President Biden recently said there's hundreds of Flints. Portland is certainly among those. A cautionary tale because our pregnant women and pediatricians only here we have, quote, safe and delicious, quote, tap water. Perpetuated by decades by state and local water officials. The Portland story is about a public water system keeping citizens in the dark. Communication staff omit and mislead through public education, use words to downplay chronic water lead here. Advocates have been censured and even worse. In this way, PWB has completely deflected water lead to schools, homes, and businesses, despite troubling municipal levels with more than a dozen action level exceedances. We raise our children here, assured over and over that Portland tap water is as pristine as the source water it comes from. While the LCRR's intent was to minimize lead at users' tap, Portland Water instead prioritized lead paint. They created an alternative to LCRR compliance. In 1997, it's still in place. It allows repeat ALEs without violation. It also allows PWB to use improper corrosion control, corroding our galvanized service lines, home solder, and fixtures. After months of waiting to hear why there's no data nor plans to conduct a materials inventory, Portland Water Director told advocates, quote, Portland has never used lead service lines, so there is no inventory of lead pipes to map, unquote. In 1990, the Water Quality Policy Director for Portland Water wrote an industry paper titled Convincing the Public That Drinking Water is Safe. Inarguably, it remains the Bureau's operating instructions with one guiding principle. Quote, they must be told what you have determined they ought to know, unquote. And it's worked well for them, as in 2001, when it was discovered DC was 30 times worse than Flint. At that time, Portland had 3 consecutive years of action level exceedances, yet schools were blamed. In 2016, when lead was found at both Portland and Newark public schools, Newark eventually learned citywide treatment issues were damaging pipes and releasing lead. But here, lead leaders only raised alarm on cryptosporidium, urging a now $1.4 billion filtration plant. Since 2017, we have asked officials for water filters, especially for disproportionately impacted communities of color and low-income children whose brains are developing. We know they're listening because they've doubled down on messaging. A new website proclaims, quote, we serve excellent drinking water every minute of every day, unquote. It's pervasive. False assurances only reinforce unaccountability and inaction. This extends far and wide. Last year, our county health officer said, quote, water, as far as we know, is not a huge contributor to lead poisoning in children, thank goodness, unquote. Even while her lead poisoning investigator wasn't testing home tap water. We're so grateful to EPA scientists, national experts, and citizen advocates for catching us up on science and the truth. As EPA considers the LCR revisions, please take away loopholes and excuses. We appreciate the President respecting current science and renewing awareness on lead in drinking water because officials here have worked strategically and effectively since 1990 to avoid both. Finally, because our water lead levels are 2 to 14 times higher than any Western region city, please immediately sunset Portland's alternative LCR, assign independent oversight, and ensure honest public education. Also, mandatory materials inventory and a public map, full replacement, including pigtails, meters, galvanized service line, and solder, particularly harmful in Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take another 15-minute break right now and come back at 4:15 sharp. If I could get the slide with the docket information back up, I would appreciate it. And we will see you all at 4:15. Thanks. Welcome back. I see Jennifer and Yuting. Hopefully Eric is on his way. All right, we have our listeners. Oh, I apologize. Next is Clyde Morgan from Kansas. Clyde, I believe you're the 966 number. If you could please unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Mm,
Hello?
just barely. Just barely. Can you
Okay.
turn it up a little?
Got that turned up.
Okay, you're good now.
Good now? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you fine now.
Yeah,
Please, go ahead.
my name's Clyde Morgan. I do a lot of research on my own. And one of the things that's disturbed me about this way this approach is I love the idea of reducing the lead content because I've had family members affected by it. But why is the source tested as it comes into water plants? In Flint, Michigan, that's where the problem erupted from. It didn't erupt out of the copper pipes initially, not the sterilization of 13,000 parts per billion. It came out of the river that was also known already be contaminated. My approach here is not to be reactive, but be proactive. Have these water plants check those chemicals as they come into their plants, not wait until things are processed. You wait till things are processed and that sludge goes out on farmland now. It goes out in gardens. People take it home thinking it's full of minerals when actually it's full of contaminants. And what I've seen so far, this new lead and copper rule is negating how much copper ionization generators are performing and put in heavy metals put into the water system at this time, not only into the water systems, but also into the pools. And this, by neglecting this, we are going to end up with this sludge, just like reports is a great article out of Laos, where the sludge of contamination, the sludge was so bad that it made everything toxic levels. I think we don't pay attention of this, all the sources. We've done good at taking the lead out of brass. We've done great at taking the lead out of solder. Those things are in fact in place. And it was proven more or less in Flint, Michigan, when that level went down dramatically to normals within, I think it was right around 6 months when they switched the water back over to the city of Michigan water instead of out of the river, those levels went down. That tells me that we need to be paying more attention at what those levels are when they come into the water plants, what they are when they go out of that water plant. We can't be going in and just thinking it's all happening. Yes, we need to put in corrosive retardants and this type of thing, but we got to start paying it, be proactive and get from the source. I approach everything from a quality approach. And whereas you have a non-conformance, you have a corrective action, you have a cause, you have a benefit, you have risk. Yes, we have risk right now. We have risk every day of our lives, but we're getting a hold of it. You guys, EPA is doing a great job at grabbing hold and trying to take hold of responsibility. And I commend you for doing that. And I'd just like to watch more of all the heavy metals, including lead. Lead's probably the most detrimental to humans and to animals. But as plant life goes, plants can thrive on lead. And that's been shown in research also. But for humans, human tissue, no, it will not happen. As far as the negating of watching for the copper, this is a lead and copper heavy metal program for corrosion. And we're putting the corrosive particles right in there using ion generators. So I think don't lose sight of the problem that's building because of sight that you've already seen. Take effort to push towards keeping the water clean in the future. I've seen my dad worked in a battery plant took blood tests every month. I've seen the land sit there for 15 years, couldn't be used because it's full of lead. And once these heavy metals get in there, I don't care if it's lead, zinc, copper, there's loads of them. I work around galvanizing. That's one of the things I'm supposed to be an expert at, is galvanizing process. I don't like galvanizing because it too dissipates over time. So that's my high horse today, and I really appreciate you guys bringing this out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clyde. I'm being told that we have 3 more speakers scheduled, but they are not yet online. So we are going to have to take another 10-minute break. Please stand by, and we will see you again at, I guess, around 4:30. Thank you.